Good evening, everybody, and welcome to V2, Lab for the Unstable Media. What's good to know before kicking off is that we're organizing this via the webinar function. So the only the only people that you'll see are the three speakers. Throughout the session, I'll make room for questions, but we manually have to allow you to ask those questions. So you're allowed, feel free to mention them anytime, and we'll get to it when it makes sense. So welcome to V2 Lab for the Unstable Media, currently the V2 TV version, the second Who Cares session with Driessens Verstappen and Sjoerd van Tuinen. Yesterday kicked off the series with Nathalie Gebert and Janette Pols, which was a really interesting conversation, I'd say. And before diving into the conversation with Sjoerd and Maria Driessens Verstappen, I'd like to briefly give a context of what we're, how the To Mind is to Care came about, and it's also, for me, it all started with this publication, the To Mind is to Care publication made by V2 Publishing with Joke Brouwer and Sjoerd van Tuinen as editors. It consists of of 12 essays, one of which is the official essay that is a really interesting addition to a publication like this by Driessens Verstappen. And I, in this process, see that as really the first chapter of this interdisciplinary study of care. And I, as curator, created this second chapter, which is an exhibition around the act of caring. And this exhibition focused on I picked the contribution of Ellen Desanyake, Caring About Capsules, in which she argues that things that we do not take care of lose our attention and therefore eventually are forgotten. According to her, art fulfills a necessary role in directing our attention towards things that are important or should be considered important. Artists do this by taking care of through their motivation, planning, dedication, strength, persistence, skills, and patience. The results of these actions offers insights into what caring for means in the practice of artists, how they use to investigate care themselves. They provide an insight in the preconditions of taking care of something or someone, but they also reflect, for example, on the care we take of our technology and how technology in that turn can provide for people. So all of the artworks presented in the exhibition have this act of caring or a sense of act of caring in them, focusing on either humans, other life forms, or technology. I'm well aware that many of you weren't able to see the exhibition because sadly after the opening weekend, we had to close down due to the corona measurements. So before diving into the conversation, I briefly want to show a small video documentation, so you get a glimpse of what the other works are about as well. So sorry about the hiccups. So I hope this gives a better idea of what the exhibition is about. You've, besides the work of Driessens Verstappen, you've seen the work by Nathalie Gebert, Ana Maria Gomez Lopez, who I'll be talking to tomorrow, and We Make Carpets, who will be on the program Saturday. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce both of the speakers whom we go in conversation with. First is Maria of Driessens Verstappen. It's the artist couple Driessens Verstappen, Erwin Driessens and Maria Verstappen have worked together since the 1990s. After studying at the Maastricht Academy of Fine Arts and the Rijksacademie van de Beeldende Kunsten in Amsterdam, they jointly developed a multi-facet oeuvre of software, machines and objects. Their research focused on the possibilities that physical, chemical and computer algorithms can offer the development of image generating processes. Driessens and Verstappen have participated in numerous exhibitions in the Netherlands and elsewhere at venues including the Stedelijk Museum Amsterdam, the Museum Boijmans van Beuningen in Rotterdam, the Kröller-Müller Museum in Arnhem, Centre de Pompidou in Paris, Laboral, IBM in New York, and the Dutch Electronic Art Festival in Rotterdam. And the other speaker is Sjoerd van Tuinen. Sjoerd is an associate professor of philosophy at the Erasmus University of Rotterdam. Sjoerd van Tuinen has edited dozens of books, including De Leuze and The Fault, A Critical Reader, Speculative Art Histories, and the Polemic of Reassessments. He's also author of Peter Sloterdijk Eindprofiel and is co-founder of the Erasmus University for Public Knowledge. And in the starting conversation, I think we talked with Maria about maybe diving a little bit more into the work that I'm currently sitting in front. So I'd like to give the floor to Maria.
Thank you, Florian, by introducing me. I'm here half of Driessens Verstappen, but it's more convenient this way. But he says hello to you, all of you. The project Herbarium Vivum started already a couple of years ago when we developed the first edition of the Herbarium Vivum, and that was presented in Wageningen in an arboretum, which is a kind of park there. And we had access to scientists of the plant sciences of the university in Wageningen, so we could discuss with them the plans that we had. And we also had access to the herbarium, which there is a big one in Wageningen. And so we got inspired by this idea of plants that are flattened and serve for scientific research. But of course, a plant normally isn't flat, so it's a kind of manipulation of the plant in order to store it and to make an archive of it. So we were thinking of letting plants grow in two-dimensional form by itself. So that in the end you would have a flat plant, but then it would have been grown that way. So that seemed to us more objective approach towards making a flat plant. But when we discussed with the scientists of the university, because we thought maybe they know how a plant would behave in that kind of very narrow space, they couldn't tell us. They said, well, we do a lot of experiments with bringing plants in very extreme conditions. For instance, very salinated soils or very hot or dry circumstances, and they could tell about that, but they never do that kind of form experiment. So I think it's typically a question of an artist to think about this kind of experiments. I will share screen now to show you some image of that first edition that we did. Maybe. So here we see the installation, which of course is this photograph is taken further in the progressment of the growth. So we started out with almost the white sheet, where a very little plant was planted in the soil of the park, and in the frame that you see, there is a little hole down there. so that the plant has its roots in the soil of the park, but what is visible above the soil is within this very limited space of 1.5 centimeters deep. So, so I will show you a few other pictures of that installation, which were containing 10 frames with 10 different crop plants. So we choose like a tomato, a tobacco plant, what did we have? A hemp plant in the back, a borage plant. And you see that they are able to grow within this narrow space, which in the beginning wasn't very, we weren't very sure about that, because it's of course quite a limitation. So during this, this exhibition in the park, people could see at any moment the situation of the plant. But of course, you can never evaluate all the stages of the development in that way. So we took pictures from time to time, and then you can, of course, make a kind of collage like this. You see here 3 stages of the development of the tobacco plant. And I have another one. This is the hemp. So first you see very, very small plant, but the plant is very, very adaptive. So that is the amazing thing about plants, that we normally see a plant in more or less the same form, can be bigger, can be smaller, can differ from color, but in any circumstances, the plant makes the best out of it, so to say. So even if you give it the narrow space like this, it's able to develop its foliage, its flowering, and then of course, eventually it decays. And to have all the whole cycle within the framework of an exhibition, we choose only for plants that have an annual cycle. So they have the whole cycle within 1 year, and gives you the idea of. And then of course we did this plant. The tomato plant we installed in the window of V2 a few years ago, also to have it grown from a very small seedling into a plant that is containing tomatoes. Well, maybe introduce a little bit the idea of herbarium vivum, which is actually a Latin term that literally means a living herbarium, a living collection of plants, so to say. First, you had herbarium, which was a collection of drawings of plants. But then a few centuries ago, this idea of living herbarium was introduced as not containing drawings of plants, but containing the real biological materials. So that was called the herbarium vivum. So in our project, we take it actually even more literal, because of course the herbarium vivum contains dead plants, and in our herbarium it contains living plants. So when Joke invited us to think about a visual essay for the book, we thought about a second experiment with the living herbarium, because what we did in the park was a vertical experiment. So the plant grows a vertical, two-dimensional, but we also questioned if a plant would also grow flat in a horizontal plane. So for us, it was a kind of interesting question to think of making this essay for the book, because when I was young, and I think many of us have done that when you are a child, you want to also make herbarium. You take a book, actually like a phone book or another thick book, and then you put the plant in between the sheet, and then you close it and you let it dry. So for us, there was this like logical connection with creating a new herbarium for the book. But of course, we could not deal with the living plant itself, so we had to do the photography of the stages. And because we already did that as a documentation of the first Herbarium Vivum, we thought that it would be nice to have like for each plant, like 5 stages of the development from the beginning until to the decay of the plant. So we started making like 15 of these planters, which have the exact size of the book. So we of course had to choose also plants that would fit in this smaller scale. So we choose for smaller plants, and then here you see a little bit of how actually the work was made, because we had to find a way to enclose the plant, but it has to have light, but also air. So we had to have this mosquito net that covers the plant. And at the moment when we take the photograph, we replace the mosquito net with a perspex plane. So then it becomes like a translucent sheet. Because if you don't do it like this way, the plant will just die because it cannot breathe, and it will become too moist, and it will become like a slime or algae everywhere. So that's the way we could maintain all the conditions of the plant, because that's a very important thing here. That when you put a plant in a very extreme condition, it needs more care than a normal plant would do in its own ecology outside, because it's in a planter. So yeah, of course you have isolated the plant, and then you also have the extreme condition, which means that, for instance, when there is a plague, for instance, with lice, also the lice are protected behind this mosquito net. So there is no natural enemy to eat the lice. So the plant will be completely like overgrown with lice. So these kind of things we discovered were quite interesting. That you know, the plant is quite vulnerable in this way. So because of the time schedule for the book, we also could not let them grow all in the daylight, in the normal sunlight. So we started in the winter. So we had to use these LED lights to grow the plants. And then from time to time, we took pictures. As a start, it's just the white sheet. So the seed is in there. You don't see it yet, but there's a cover of white sand to let it look like a white herbarium paper sheet. So we started with a white frame. And then you have the first stage of sprouting and a very small plant. And then suddenly it starts to grow very fast, this fitillary plant. And then of course there's the flowering. It's just a couple of days. So you have to really watch this cycle very precisely, because you can miss a stage very easily. So it also meant that for 1 year, we couldn't leave the house for more than 2 days. So it's also kind of commitment to the process that we had to think of. And of course, then here is a stage of the decay, which is also kind of a beautiful kind of last, final picture of the whole. So, and then we had to, of course, to let it even more look like a herbarium, it's the categorization of things. So we had to make those labels with the name, Latin name and the common name, to categorize each plant. So we did that as a kind of textual overlay over the picture. And for the exhibition in Rotterdam, we show the Dutch version. So the prints are with the Dutch names, and in the book we see the English names added next to the Latin names. And then each series is framed in a very nice made wooden frame. And then, of course, we have the view of V2, where we have exhibit all the 8 different plants. So, so yes, this is my introduction to the work. So it has a little history already before we came to this installation at V2.
Yes, thanks, Maria. What I, of course, bypassed a little in the introduction, but what I found really interesting is that, of course, as visual essay in a publication like this, and for the ones who had the chance to read it, the care or the attention that you give to the photos themselves, or the images, is a lot more than, let's say, in the exhibition setting that I'm currently sitting in. Of course, we are very aware of a painting that's been watched for somewhat 30 seconds on average in a museum, and especially like the travel of, I always explain it as the growth till blooming till also dying in some cases. I found it really interesting to have this part of such a academic publication as well. So yeah, and it's,
in the book you never see the pictures next to each other, because the book here is also like the passing of the time. So you each time you see one time frame. So for us it was also interesting to have all the prints next to each other, so you can kind of compare. You can see the growth actually, and you see from the beginning it's a very it's almost like a minimalist picture with only a white frame, but then it suddenly becomes a very complex kind of picture in itself. So that also for us is always a kind of part of our research, is how from a kind of simple idea or a simple mechanism, you create very complex results in the end. So for us, a plant here is also a kind of generative system that when you bring it in a very specific extreme condition, it generates a new form of itself. So for us, that was a very interesting question. How can we produce a different variety of the form of this particular plant? And so yeah, and there, of course, where the manipulation comes in, and we feel quite dualistic about that we manipulate a plant in that way, but the adaptivity of the plant is such a great feature of a plant that it's well, you can have different opinions about that, but it shows something that we as human beings can never do. When we get in a very extreme condition, we cannot adapt our body in that way. We are intelligent to maybe find an escape or to invent something that can help us, but the plant has a different type of intelligence there that is actually distributed in the body as a whole. So the intelligence here is to how the plant deals with this extreme environment is quite of a different type of intelligence, but it's obviously it is intelligent in that.
Yeah, before introducing Sjoerd, I'm seeing if he has feedback or observations that he has. What I found interesting, because you touched upon that already when we had the conversation with Janette Pols yesterday about her contribution into the book, and we made the connection with Natalie's work. She introduced, besides these medical ethics, ideas of care, like the patient's autonomy, doing good, not doing harm, justice in she adds these aesthetics values of care, and that's lots of things like comfort, gratitude. In Natalie's work, she talked a lot about stress of the plants, and you already touched a little bit upon these added values that you find in already maybe taking some of these situations out of the medical ethics. How did you already felt that you at least had to take extra care of the plants because you already placed them in this? Did that also give you? Did that broaden your idea of what taking care of was, or did it?
Yeah, we already had a feeling that it would be much tougher for a plant to grow in the horizontal plane than in the vertical one. But this was quite tough. So I was really sorry that some of the plants died preliminary, so didn't flower. So probably the idea of that a plant is able to flower and to produce new seeds, that's a kind of good feeling. Like it's like it's kind of proof that it's fine. But yeah, probably there's a lot of projection going on there. But yeah, we really had to take care of the plants more than like in a normal situation, of course. Yeah.
And in care, you mean nutrition and water, or also the extra added care in terms of maybe singing or additional light, or?
No, it's quite the normal care, but I say like what I told you with the lice, that also you give a protective area for this kind of parasites. They have no birds that pick them or other bigger insects. So there's very little holes in the pot, and also the mosquito net. So small insects could enter the pot, but were never eaten by other natural enemies. So there were a few plants that were totally covered with lice, and then they died because of that. So sometimes I was picking with a pincet, I was picking the lice off of the whole plant. So normally I would never do that because it's not necessary. But here I did that a lot. So yeah, these kind of things.
Thanks. Yeah, before start firing off with questions, Sjoerd, because you, of course, edited to the book and you are well aware of all of the essays and also contributed yourself. Is there some thoughts right away or feedback? Or
Oh, well, right now, I first of all would like to thank Maria for her presentation. It's very nice to meet the artist behind the work. And I remember asking Joke, why don't we include a text from Driessens Verstappen? And I'm not sure if she ever passed that request on, but it's very nice to get it now.
okay.
And so that's
well,
really great.
I'm really bad in writing text, and that's of course why I choose to become a visual artist and not a writer.
Sure.
So yeah, so
fair enough.
Please come with images.
Yeah, and so the images were very powerful, and I think it was really fantastic. I mean, the book looks like no other book because of it. I think it worked out really well. Also thanks to the design by Joke Brouwer.
Yeah, I like also the cover with where she uses the mosquito net covered planter, and then she did embroidery on top of it, which I really like a lot. It's really beautiful.
Yeah. So one of the associations I now had with what you were saying, and I also had before, is in a way has to do with the framing, because the plants, the ones you showed that were grown in the park, they were in the soil, and then they were framed. That is isolated in the way, turned into an artwork by the frame. in a way decontextualized, but also not really, because there is an ongoing resonance with the three-dimensional or more three-dimensional vegetation in the background. So it's a very interesting interplay between nature and artificiality that has very different forms. For the book, it takes on a very different form again, and then for the installation in at V2 Lab, again, it's different. So I see it as a kind of experiment with the exhibition value of vegetation. This is a concept I borrow from Walter Benjamin, of course, who says that we have the artwork loses its aura in the age of its mechanical reproduction, but it acquires a new value, exhibition value. And these plans were drawn and framed for display. At the same time, they are not completely reproducible. So it's a play with the reproducibility and with the conditions of exhibition, and yet also singularizing them again. So yeah, I think it's been a very rich project. I have one question for you, and basic question, and that is: have you ever given the scientists at Wageningen your feedback? Because you've done experiments in a way, not maybe scientific experiments, but experiments nonetheless.
Yeah. Well, the first
testing what plants can do, what their bodies are capable of.
Yeah. Well, the first experiment that we did was actually on the terrain of the university, where they have this experimentation soil. So because we didn't want to build like 10 frames for the exhibition and then start to see what happened, and then maybe nothing would happen. I mean, we had 1 year in advance, so we had quite a long time to develop the project. So the year before, we did the experiment with a tomato plant, because the scientists told us that if a tomato plant would do it, would take that condition, then other plants would also be doing it, because a tomato plant is very picky on its environment. So it's very easy to disturb its growth. So we started with doing experiment on the terrain of the university, where the scientists actually helped us to build the frames there and to do the experiment. And then when the tomato plant did it very well, they told us, now you can consider other plants. They will then also grow in the same way. But they could not tell us before. So that for us was kind of interesting, that they know really a lot of plants, but not this kind of typical thing that we were interested in. They just said, you have to first do it and to see what happens. And then they also were quite curious to see that a plant was taking that. I mean, it's like a 1.5 centimeter for a plant that's like growing more than 2 meters in height, which is quite extraordinary, I think.
Yeah. Is there such a thing as plant abuse, like in the sense that there is animal abuse?
Well, I have to say that there are very different opinions about this, because when we were in the park, and sometimes we were there to take photographs, and then there was people walking in the park, and they were going there maybe every day or every week. So they have seen the project and they say, oh, are you the artist? You are what did he call us? Like the plant, how to say that? When you're cruel.
Abuser?
Hmm?
Abuser, maybe?
No, not abuser. What's the word in English? The martelaar. I don't know what is the word.
Yeah.
Martyr?
No, I don't know. But then they compared it with what the Chinese do with the feet of the women, you know, in another century, that they would like make the feet as small as possible to fit in a very small shoe and so on. But for me, that's a little bit too anthropomorphic kind of thinking of because we cannot adapt as a human being. So we think that a plant also has a lot of pain when you put them in this condition. And also Erwin has a little bit more that feeling than I have. So we had a lot of discussions about how we feel, what we do with the plant. And I am more on the side of showing this adaptivity that a plant is showing in this way. That is really beautiful, and that you in the end have a different form of that same type of plant. So it's like, yeah, I felt more free, so to say, to manipulate the plant this way. But for me, it was important that the plant flourishes and flowers and produces seeds and then decays in a natural way. For me, that's a kind of proof that it's doing well. So, yeah. But yeah, some people found it not okay that we did it. But yeah, when you compare it with the herbarium, like normally what people do, what the scientists would do is take the plant when it's just on the most beautiful moment of its life, when it's flowering, then cut it off or take it out of the soil and put it in between papers. In our project, at least, the plant fulfills its whole life cycle. So in that way, if you compare it with how we normally treat plant, like you buy a bouquet of flowers. Well, how cruel is that? I mean,
Sorry.
Now, I find it interesting that also, even though it's only, of course, using the fruits, but in Japan you have lots of these melons that are being grown in cubes.
oh
And
yeah,
and those are expensive for sure, and are being photographed, and it's being seen as something special. And in this case, you get maybe they get negative reactions as well, but it feels
yeah. Well, the difference is that sometimes people look at plants or fruits as a product. When we can eat it, then it's kind of, oh yeah, it's justification. But when we don't eat the plant, then it should be natural. All should be natural. So it's like a division of our judgment about plants. I think when it's for eating it, then everything is okay, like we do with animals too. I mean. Seems everything is okay, but then when there is some natural place with horses that die or whatever, then people become very very critical about the conditions.
What I really liked about installing the exhibition here and seeing your work framed as all five of the life cycle of the plants in a row, I immediately, this was for me the illustration of the introduction of the book that Sjoerd wrote together with Joke Brouwer. It's about, you make this statement about the carelessness that's over, but who should care and in what way? And then you say is care about precaution, conservation, or worry. And I think, well, for me, it's like seeing them in this line. It frames everything. It takes away the worry because the life cycle is very visible, of course. And yeah, so yeah, I was happily surprised by that.
Yeah, but of course, nobody sees all the plants that died, that didn't make it that far, because there were quite, I think, maybe 10 or more plants died during the process or before finishing their life cycle. So yeah, that you can see.
Sjoerd, from the essay that you contribute, the common sense from critique to care. In this context, do you want? do you want to introduce the common sense, and especially in the domain of care? Because I think that's.
I can do that, but maybe I can say a few words about the book in general as well.
Oh, yes, of course, yes.
Why it is as it is, because in a way, what I get from Maria's description is what they're testing the resilience of a plant, and resilience is one of those trend words nowadays in managerial speak, especially. And it has a history, of course, in ecology from the 60s, 70s, and systems theory in the 60s, 70s. That's where it comes from. And nowadays it's used by everyone for veerkracht in Dutch, in psychological contexts, in organizational contexts, etc. Of course, we can be very critical of that. I am very critical of it, but it does indicate that care is somehow something that is topical not only in the art world, where it is, of course, almost as a topic very hegemonic. It's everywhere, but it is also in a very different context, and generally it's always related to this notion of resilience. And as far as I understand that, resilience is the capacity to survive, to handle change, to adapt, but it also precludes the question of what is the good life. In a way, the more we are obsessed with our survival, the less attention goes to what is the good life. So care nowadays, I think, should have the added value, or should have what the notion of care should contribute is to point our attention to what means living well, whether it concerns plants or other things. And it is in that context also that yeah, I think we decided to call the book "To Mind is to Care," because that means that where resilience can be used in a very thoughtless way, it's just like, okay, we want things to remain sustainable one way or another. We want our business model to be sustainable. The whole city can crumble, but we need to remain resilient. So we need algorithms, we need whatever to organize that. And so, to mind is to care is about introducing thought in this situation in which resilience seems to be the key word of our time. At least this is how I interpreted it. Yeah. So it's the notion stems from the title stems from a quote by John Dewey, found in his book Art as Experience, which is a fantastic book, slightly modernist in its tastes, but incredibly interesting book on aesthetics, not very well widely read nowadays. And he says, the mind is not a thing. It's not like the I think in Descartes, like the cogito ergo sum, thinking, and which presuppose the activity of thinking presupposes some kind of, as if it presupposes some kind of substantial subjectivity that thinks. Res cogitans. No, he says the mind is a practice. It's a doing, and it's a feeling, and a discognition, and all these things at once. And he combines all these things in the idea that, in a way, to mind is to care. To care, we could say, is to try to live. The plant also cares when it is trying to survive, and not only trying to survive, it is trying to flourish in a way. So there's also an expressive component which is absolutely essential to the life of plants. And of course, that also goes for human and social life. So to care is to try to live. And what I focused on in my chapter is what Hannah Arendt once called the life of the mind. Can we care for the life of the mind? How minding actually takes place, how we have organized it, how it's mediated, how it's facilitated by language, by technologies, by all sorts of conditions that that need to be taken care of by thought itself. So what I was trying to think through is what it means for thought to care for its own conditions of existence. So there's this kind of circular movement here. And so I borrow a lot of concepts from systems theory, feedback, and so on. And I think, yeah, the notion of care is absolutely crucial there. Actually, the moment when I first started thinking that I wanted to work on care was when I visited my father, who sails. He lives on his boat, and you know that cybernetics, the word cybernetics, or at the basis of systems theory, derives from netos, I think, the stuurman, the man who steers the boat. And I was on the boat and I was thinking, you know, everything you do here immediately feeds back into the sustainability, the capacity of you, the assemblage of between you and the boat to remain in existence, to persist in existence, to remain fit for doing what you want to do. So this incredible circularity that involves living on a boat, I find very inspiring in a way. And so these are kind of the resonances that I had when I was thinking of care. This is many years ago. And so I was very happy to see that, to hear from Joke that she was also interested in this subject and that we could make a book out of it. And of course, already at the time when we decided to make this book, and this must have been 17, I think, care was very prominent as a concept in the art world already. And I think this has to do with and the relative dominance of feminist discourses, which are very firmly rooted in the ethics of care. But it also has to do with the return of craftsmanship, of making, and the idea of the artist as a maker. Because the craftsman, of course, is someone who does not just conceive of something, but has as much attention for the process of execution as for the conceptual moment in the creative process. It also caters very much to the interest of curators, because the word curation comes from cura, which has to do with care, and the notion of conservation. So I think there's many reasons, and maybe the most important one is, of course, a critical one, namely that the capitalism has a very poor relationship with care, as feminists in particularly know. And so the notion of care immediately resonates with the concept of precarity. And in a way, care is both a solution and a symptom of the social deficits of working in late capitalism, especially working in the art world. And so there's many things to say about care. We can go into some of them, I hope, but yeah, that's basically the background. And then my personal take was really about the life of the mind. So basically, you know, what happens in a world.
What are the needs, Sjoerd, for the life of the mind to have it healthy and to flourish? And is it polemic? Is it discussion? Is it provocation even? Or what are the ingredients for our minds?
It's not so easy yet. Traditionally, we like to think, I think it needs critical reflection. And that can take the form of polemic, but polemic is a very, you know, very specific to a certain 18th, 19th century ideal of public space, which in a way no longer exists. That's why I think the classical polemical gestures that you will find in Willem Frederik Hermans or Sartre, or, you know, they no longer really exist. They're no longer made as much, I think. And they've been replaced by trolling, by very different forms of agitation.
Would you think that nowadays, when we are all in a kind of information bubble, that maybe our mind is also kind of decaying because we only have like the information that we want to have and to share, and not the ones that might
very much yeah,
about things and
yeah,
make a challenge about what we think?
yeah, so what used to be like something like critical democratic deliberation, by means of which we could have some kind of humanist idea of control over technology, for example, all that has long been short-circuited by other processes, by corporations, by algorithms, algorithmic governance, by marketing, whatever. So what you have is what Bernard Stiegler calls a kind of a kind of degeneration or decadence of noesis, of thought, a kind of monoculture, if you wish, because the life of the mind needs diversity, it needs pluralism. There's a kind of shortcutting of reflection or contemplation. And this takes many forms. I work in university, and 100 years of specialized sciences and ever further specialization has led to ever more specialized forms of expertise. But there's no way you can bring these things together anymore. So the knowledge economy is actually a very entropic way of dealing with thought, which makes thought basically very poor and basically blocks that, makes it very stupid in many ways. I consider stupidity one of the great metaphysical problems, in the sense also of becoming insensitive, of no longer caring. Becoming careless is actually almost synonymous for stupidity, because you're no longer sensitive to difference, to process, to things that are going on. The same with the contemporary art world. It's very self-referential in a way. It's become very self-referential. That is why the concept of care and exhibitions about care and publications about care are flooding the art. I've been flooding the art world in 2 years' time. There is something, that's that's just another example. So I think fake news, the problem with fake news, the way that Hannah Arendt actually called related totalitarianism with stupidity, precisely in the sense that we no longer have a sense for the truth. Right? So in a way, I think what we see is also with big data as a kind of general entropy in the life of the mind, thought not taking care of itself. And I'm interested somewhat in the infrastructure through which this can be changed, but I'm not a technician, so I'm also very limited things to say about it. But that's why I emphasized what I called in your work, Maria, the re-singularization of the very practice of exhibition or of book printing that you bring about in this way. And re-singularization is, of course, a way of overcoming entropy. Mm-hmm. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what my country.
We live in a time where we have more access to information or from other cultures, from all kind of backgrounds than ever before. So this is a kind of very strong contrast, what you're sketching, that actually, and very sad, if that's true, that we can learn a lot from each other through this internet and sharing information, but it seems that we don't want to do that. We want to create a kind of isolated space with a very narrow information cycle. So I wonder why that happens. Maybe people don't want to be challenged all the time, because maybe there's too much information that we can have no guide where to go, and maybe that's why people maybe want to block off instead of.
Well, I think you're right to say when information doesn't think, right? So what happens is that we're part of ever tighter feedback loops in which we process this information. These are ever tight, controlled in an ever tighter way by the media we use, by the what Stiegler calls the exosomatic tools. It used to be the alphabet, but nowadays language or the alphabet are very limited forms for organizing thought. And other forms have taken it over. And so these old technologies could be useful, but they always have this other side. And yeah, I mean, it has to do with, I mean, I can give a Marxist account of it, right? Where you need to extract ever more surplus value from labor. So, and nowadays that involves cognitive labor. So so you need to control it ever tighter. So there is no more space for, or very less and less space for dreaming, for example, as a typical example of a very loose feedback loop, or a mode of thinking that is, almost free from.
Do you think that the recent things that happened in the United States, when suddenly all these bubbles and what happens there has an effect on reality, or maybe not? Would there be now more focus on changing this this whole this algorithm thing that's going on all the time in the background, and feed you with more of the fake news and so on? Do you think it will, because of that, now suddenly everybody has a kind of wake-up call that it's not something just happening on the virtual world, but that it has its effect now on the real world, so to say?
No, and the thing is, because that we that is presupposed by your question, the we who would be awakened, it does not exist. And this has always been an effect of certain technologies, for example, the newspaper or mass media. The we is something that circulates in media, and that at certain critical moments also discovers itself.
Yeah.
For example, last March, but there can be no question of it.
Okay.
Except for punctual moments, punctual events. I don't think that's precisely no longer how the life of the mind is organized. And this is where the notion of common sense comes in. Because common sense is supposed to be something that is always implicitly there. If we no longer can convince each other, or we are struggling, or whatever, we can always revert back to common sense as some kind of general human background knowledge. Actually, I would say that is precisely not what common sense is. Common sense, in a way, it may have existed in one form or another, in more stable times, if you wish, less chaotic times. But nowadays, common sense is something that is absent. And so the task of caring as a task of thinking, I'm talking Heideggerian here, but you know, for 2 centuries, it has been critique. And critique, I think, in many ways, doesn't suffice anymore, and I can explain why in a minute if you're interested. But we need to somehow also understand that we will no longer be able to recreate some kind of homogenic common sense. I don't think the Biden election means that at all. I think the new president in America means a consolidation of the powers of the establishment that had lost their grip a little bit for 4 years. But these are also the people who protect the interests of Silicon Valley, who really are our rulers nowadays, who are the sovereigns. So, and who control the algorithms by which we think, and who also have brought this resilience discourse into the world. So no, I'm very pessimistic about it. I referred a lot to Stigler when I wrote my text, but Stigler committed suicide last summer after he wrote a book called Comment ne devenir pas fou? How to become crazy. He was a maniacal workaholic, but he wrote a lot about care, pensée, he called it, with an A, which is an old French word, which means caring and nourishing, and of course resonates with pensée with an E, which means thinking. And that's what he tried to do. And he was also a community organizer and many other things. And he worked with coders. and he was interested in the blockchain community. But he was also manically depressed, and yeah, I'm not sure. So what he described was how our drives can no longer, how we no longer manage to integrate our drives at a level of, or the idea of autonomous subjectivity on the basis of this ideal that lies also at the basis of our notion of critical citizenship, that our drives can no longer be integrated in desires, and actually saying what you want, knowing what you can do, knowing what you want to go along with, knowing what you cannot. So what gives you a critical distance to the other. In social media, in the ever tighter forms of self-control that we have, we are basically just disorganized drives that shoot everywhere, and the fact that we need more and more anxiolytics, more and more antidepressants, more and more, etc., is proof of the fact that we can no longer organize the energies of our lives, so to speak, and so it means that we no longer know how to care for ourselves. And the more there is a discourse about self-care nowadays, very much yoga, mindfulness. My university actually wanted to develop an app. They wanted to invest 1.1 million euros to develop a welzijns app for the students. Thank God the university council stopped it. The university has a financial problem. So a little algorithm, a little app by which you can outsource the responsibility for, you know, the lives of the students, under current conditions indeed are not going very well. This is, for me, is proof that, yeah, we have lost. We no longer have the infrastructure, the tools. We have been disappropriated or dispossessed from the media in which the life of the mind and our lives of our desire, etc., was organized. We're going through a radical disruptive moment, comparable to maybe to the media shift from writing to printing. And we have no idea what that means and where we're going. But it does mean that we are completely losing the capacity to care for ourselves, for our relationships, for our communities, etc. Stiegler calls this the process of proletarianization. And you know that the proletariat was the class that possessed nothing except its capacity for labor. It's kind of what is currently happening is a proletarianization of all our life skills.
That's a sad view.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a view, it's an analysis, but sure, yeah.
Because I think we as human beings, we have our imagination, and I hope that maybe when you compare to the plant, that that even when it's put in a very constraining situation, the plant finds a way to survive by adapting the whole body.
Yeah.
So probably the capacity that we have to escape a very narrow environment for our mind is also to train our imagination. And maybe that's something that we also sometimes forget, that imagination, creativity, to train your imagination, even to train your visual, your senses, like to really perceive the world instead of always first think about the world, but maybe first step to let the world come inside you through your senses. I think that's something I hope there we can maybe find an escape.
You're totally right. But as a dialectician, I always wonder, you know, why imagination now? Why is everybody talking about imagination? It can only be because there is an unprecedented attack on our capacity to imagine. And you know, remember what Mark Fisher, also committed suicide, called capitalist realism, right? This sense that you know, imagination is futile. The idea that we had to demand the impossible, what a ridiculous idea. We need to get over it. You know, this snigger that imagination triggers nowadays is stronger than ever in many ways. And at the same time, you're absolutely right. It is imagination that has to enrich this notion of what I call common sense, or that should somehow help us with contrasting, right? With contrasting experiences. Yeah, yeah. But it's all about the capacity to imagine. Where does it happen? Who has it? And what is the efficacy of it? If we think it happens in the art world, we're lost, because then you've already isolated it. Yeah, but I think it's definitely an essential component of care. So if you're just a realist, you cannot care. And traditionally, imagination was allied with critique, utopian thought, another world must be possible, etc. And I think that in that form it was still related to critique is a form of autonomy, is a function of autonomy. It always puts you at a certain distance from that which you come from. It produces distance. It's a way of detachment from how you've already been objectified in a way. Whereas care is, if critique is about beginnings, new beginnings, and then care is much more for an experience of lateness. Much has already been lost. And in that sense, it's closer to realism. It's about the difference, care, between late and too late. I think that's it. And it takes imagination to make that difference. I think that's where imagination comes in. If what we think is probably too late, then to imagine what can still be done. Yeah.
Yeah, I immediately have to think about the climate crisis that we are into. Maybe also, maybe in history, people have maybe kind of common ground when they thought about progression. And now we have not the same standpoints towards this idea of progression. So our imagination is kind of not calibrated. So we cannot handle the problem because everybody has to be in it actually to survive the climate crisis. So it's also that we might feel kind of uncomfortable about the fact that we have the idea that we as a single human being cannot do much, but we have to do it as a whole human, the whole world has to work on the problem, otherwise we are lost.
Yeah.
At least that's my opinion, but yeah, that sometimes makes me feel kind of powerless, and also therefore the imagination can also kind of decrease because you are not allowed to think, because it's kind of impossible to do something in that direction, or you feel that it doesn't make sense. Even if I have this imagination, well, if somebody else is thinking a different way, then we lose it in the end.
I completely agree with your diagnosis. I would say that the critical stance on climate change has always been preoccupied maybe with how do we know for sure that it is human induced or not. So it's always been this epistemological question. So skepticism, climate skepticism, denialism, and these are still late versions of the critical stance. Traditionally, of course, critique was always said the critique of the current modes of production, the current state of affairs in the name of progress. I think with the loss of progress, critique is also, with the loss of perspective of real progress, critique is also degenerated into this kind of denialism, cynicism, whatever you want to call it. And so what comes in its place, I think, in this post-critical condition where I think we are, could be this idea of care. One of my great heroes, Isabelle Stengers, wrote a famous book that has been recently translated into Dutch as well. In English, it was called In Catastrophic Times, about the barbarism to come. And then she opens by saying, you know, we have a very clear idea of where we come from and a very confused idea of where we're going towards, based on the ideas of where we come from, the classical Enlightenment narrative of progress, history, universal emancipation, etc. And the idea of the whole world or humanity as a subject that you refer to is part of that narrative. And then she says, but we are we have also crossed the threshold into a new sense of time where we actually only have obscure intuitions, sorry, only very distinct but obscure intuitions about what's happening and what needs to be done. Distinct intuitions that it's going really bad, but very obscure about what it means and how we need to respond to it. So there's a kind of baroque, chiaroscuro visual field. And imagination is the capacity to orient yourself within this, against this background noise, so to speak. That has always been the task of imagination, I think, is to orient yourself amongst fake intuitions, integrate them into something that, yeah, we can also talk about it. At least philosophically, that's how Immanuel Kant describes the imagination. And so this capacity for orientation and to break with this classical narrative, which is all too clear, which is actually blinded by its own light in many ways. And that means also to break with this idea of universality, that there is a universal subject capable of learning. Instead, what you have are small intuitions that need to be nurtured, that need to be cultivated, because we do not yet know what they mean. They are more feelings than concepts or than clear insights. So the life of the mind here really is about caring for, staying true to certain intuitions, trusting your perceptions, trusting in what you believe to be true and not how you're told to feel about it, or numbing yourself in the name of some kind of realism. That is what caring is all about, and that's how imagination is absolutely crucial. Yeah. So that's everything to do with climate change. Yeah.
It might be a good note to also open the. We have a beautiful list of attendees that I hope don't feel really alone in this interface. But to open it up, if there are some questions, feel free to type it in the chat, and I can give the floor to you. Not interrupting you, Sjoerd. Thanks for. But just feel free to let us know if you want to join in.
You can see the participants, right, under attendees, I think.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
If there are no questions, feel free to continue. Sorry for the hard interruption.
Oh no, what I was done. I was you stopped me right at the point.
Yeah. Wow.
Right, made my point, and I thought I'm really happy with the questions that Maria poses as well. But I'm also wondering how you, as an artist, deal with these kind of questions. I mean, I think you said you don't really theorize about it, but I'm pretty sure that you seem to have a pretty good idea of.
Well, over the years, Erwin and I have experimented a lot with not only biological systems like a plant, but we also create digital systems like a software that generates new images and kind of in a way that we have no control over what's happening. So we set the preconditions, which are quite handable in a sense. So, but when all these, when all aspects are going to, it's like accumulation of effects, like an interaction between what's happening, you create something very easily. It's not graspable anymore. Incomprehensible what's actually what you're seeing on the screen, or can be sculpture or something else, or a robotic kind of machine. So what I have learned over the years is that even if you think you have an overview about the conditions that you set and you have a certain expectation from it, it always turns out that you are not in control of when the process is activated and moves by itself. And that's actually how I also think about the world. Like, we as human beings, we have, of course, we are intelligent, but we cannot handle a lot of data at the same time. And we also, in time, we cannot have an overview over a large period of time ahead, what will happen. So we can maybe think a few steps. Like a chess player can predict steps. We can also do that, but never enough to foresee an effect of, for instance, an intervention in nature. If you build a dam somewhere, or if you take soil away and move it to the other side of the world, or what you do with the animals, or when you harvest, or when you cut a wood, or all these things that we do, we think that we have a logic for it, but actually we cannot oversee the effects on ecological scale. It's like the butterfly effect, you do a little thing here, but then it accumulates and then it has a very big effect on another plane. And so that's what I'm very conscious of as an artist. Of course, I can make a kind of model of it. I can isolate it in a way. I can just do experiment with it, but it tells me something about the world at large. And that's why I personally think that humans should be much more humble towards intervening in the world. And well, and that's actually all the time what we are doing and making, experimenting, is actually to have quite a rational, a systematic approach towards creation. And then you see in a very short time, it is in a situation that you really could never predict on forehand. And of course, it can be very beautiful to show that as a system that reacts in itself to previous steps of the development of it, and so on. And you can create new worlds with that in the virtual domain, and you can challenge like a plant to do something it normally would never do, and create new versions of something. But yeah, as an artist, you can do it in a kind of protected kind of environment that you create for yourself, and so on. But yeah, I realize how that everything in the world is so interconnected and so vulnerable that when you take something away here, it has an effect on every scale and on every aspect of it. And so that's what I want to share in my work, show it actually.
Would you say that care precludes grand visions, or even a strong sense of design?
Desire?
Design.
Oh, design.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, as an artist, it's like when I do research in something, I have to be careful for the conditions that I create. Are they right for letting the system create as many as different expressions? So for me, the abundance of expression reflects the conditions that I set. So result and process, both, they reflect each other. So the conditions for me, when I create some system and only there is two results coming out of it, then I would not be satisfied, and I would say, okay, I have to take more care for setting the preconditions so that there can be more freedom in what's the results that come out of the process. So this takes a lot of experimentation to find the right spot in the process where uncontrollable things can happen, actually.
Yeah,
and that's exactly what our planet as a whole, and the whole this vulnerable interaction between things is right. It's that spot, actually. It's a spot where many things can happen, but when it moves a little bit out of where the conditions are changed, suddenly everything could die or end up in this only two possibilities, like yeah. So
yeah, exactly. So there is not just the conditions here, and then the results need to somehow match them. There must be an ongoing circularity between them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's precisely how care, philosophically speaking, differs from critique. Because critique is always about the conditioning of something. What are the a priori's of something? Step back.
Yeah. Well, yeah, conditioning has kind of a negative connotation in like you want a specific thing from it. But the way I think of a condition is that it is freeing it's giving the freedom of expression of something. So it's like you don't know actually what's happening. So that's conditioning doesn't have to be kind of focused on a specific result, but you can also create conditions that are just like open to be explored, and things that happen that you cannot predict, and so on. And that's actually always the goal in the work that I'm interested in.
I see that there is a question from Anna Maria, and which relates to what you're saying. So
yeah, I'll allow her to talk. I think, Anna Maria, you're allowed to talk.
I almost regret having asked the question, because it's so much more interesting to hear both of you have this back and forth. But I really just have to say, when I heard Maria talk about how perhaps there had been some people who had expressed judgment towards her work, their work, excuse me, Maria and Erwin, I was very thankful for Sjoerd bringing up the concept of resingularization, because when I saw the work firsthand, when I went to install my own piece in the exhibition, thankfully to be able to see it in person as much as in the book, what struck me was that it was a very impractical way of engaging with a plant. And I say this in a beneficial light, as someone who also engages impractically with organisms, plant, animal, otherwise. And to me, that sort of commitment to repeating the act of creating a composition, a visual composition, by having, you know, the resistance and resilience, if you will, of the plant not being able to grow vertically, but still having to grow, wanting to resume an original shape, but not being able to, in a way, you are isolating a condition that many of us have taken for granted with regards to sort of industrial applications in horticulture and agriculture to containment of plants or to the creation of a monoculture, all sorts of conventions that have become really rather normative and that not necessarily are, if you will, taken into integral care by society as a whole. Surely very much close to the people who are directly in contact with plants, with agriculture, with soil. There are, in fact, invested communities, both urban and rural, that think about these things, certainly. But it's by and large accepted that agro-industry can distort the conventions of plant growth. And so when I heard your talk about the kind of resingularization, and I see Maria and Erwin's commitment to the impractical, I sort of relate to it at a personal level for myself when I engage in similar operations as a form of dissent, of quiet, certainly perhaps not very effective, and dissent in impractical in its not going with a consensus, perhaps. But I wondered if this resonated with you, Maria. I suspect it really does, because you have been saying things that I relate to and can perhaps accommodate to this light. But yeah, again, I almost regret to have interrupted your flow, your conversation. I'm thankful for that, you know, your back and forth.
It's
And
also
yeah.
nice to hear something, have some feedback from the attendees. And yeah, I really like your comment. So yeah, the kind of reactions that one gets towards this work with the plants is probably also because you present it as an artwork. So people seem to be more critical towards the whole process, or the fact that I manipulate the growth of the plant is because I do it for the cause of an artwork. And that's what I also was reflecting. With Erwin, I reflected on that, because in so many cases we take it for granted what people are doing to plants, or what we ourselves are doing to plants, and we put them in a pot and place it on our window side, and so that's also, we manipulate plants all the time. But it seems as if you do it for the sake of art, that it becomes a bit more problematic than in others, in other circumstances.
Well, for me, it might start as an artwork, certainly, but in the way that particularly in its repetition, it really starts for me being something that goes beyond kind of the ambitions of the artwork, and actually starts really talking about a behavior and a sort of the constantly revisiting the same behavior is sort of questioning to me a model. And in that, when I look at what is at least a prevalent model of plant growth in the country where we are located, and in fact in most of the industrialized world, I find that it goes unspoken. And so to only harness it to an artwork, I think for me, and I say this with the admiration of what you have done, actually limits the possibility of perhaps trying to articulate a question in a different way, a political question in a different way. But thank you again, both of you.
Thank you also for your comment.
Yeah, it's great to hear you speak today, since I can't make it tomorrow. There was something I was thinking of, but now I lost it because of your question. Actually, it's a question from Maria, because how metaphorical can we take your work? We are confined these days. We are overused to plants to some extent. At least here, I'm in Portugal, and they call it a lockdown confinamento.
I think, yeah, like a plant is always kind of optimum in its situation, where the seed lands, a plant doesn't know about a better soil or a better climate, or, you know, so it only knows the world from this one point of view, where it's landed, where the seed was landed. So the plant is always an optimum related to the circumstances. So I think when we are now all confined in our houses, we cannot go out. We also have to make the best of it, I think, right now within our situation. I hope everybody has a kind of a nice home where somebody feels him or herself at home. I think that's very important in these times, that you have a good place to stay. Otherwise, I think it will be kind of hell. No. So.
Yeah. I guess my question is: do we actually have what we need? Do we actually own the capacity to care? Are we actually able to take care of ourselves and others on the current circumstances?
Mhm.
If care was ever an actual topic, then of course it is in the pandemic.
You mean it now more in sense of the disease and the pandemic and so on?
No, in a much larger sense.
Yeah.
For our mental health in particular.
Yeah.
For students,
I find it personally difficult now, because I really need to see artworks, to go to festivals and exhibitions and museum and so on. Just also because I need to have a constant kind of input to orientate myself in the world. So, and also, of course, now I can go for a walk. I also like to walk in nature, but suddenly it's very crowded in these places. So, I really need I need input, and I really feel not very good in this time. I mean, I have a nice house, and I can of course work on my art, but the inspiration is lost in a way. So yeah, I don't know how it's that for you as a writer.
It's dreadful, and but I was thinking about this, basically what we've seen over the past year is the complete failure of the state to care for its people. We see, I mean, of course, we know that the welfare state has been crumbling for a long time, and all experienced consequences in one way or another. But what this is so acute that I think it makes all of us anarchists somewhat, very quickly. And the other reason why we become anarchists is, of course, that there is no really large-scale, plausible leftist project, at least not in Northwest Europe. And then anarchism is usually what remains, right? And the anarchist tradition is, of course, has a lot to say about care, in addition to many other backgrounds that we already discussed, especially related to mutual aid. But what I discover now is that mutual aid is almost impossible. I have no idea how to do it, and that's very dismaying. It's like the thing that was left is kind of gone. So I think we are experiencing a very deep crisis of care at the moment. Yeah, although everything seems to revolve around care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm not sure where that is going.
No, and also in the past 15 or 20 years, what happens to the sciences and the arts, where actually I think some important research is done also on the level of the imagination, like the more basic research, like the fundamental research and so on, it's almost marginalized in these neoliberal times. So there I also find we should we should make a change, I hope, in the next years, that we allow more imagination and also therefore more fundamental science and more fundamental research in art, like the autonomous art, so to say, that not everything has to be immediately kind of effective in the sense of making money with the research and benefit from it in a very literal way. So I hope new times will come for that too.
Care for money and care for financing of art is part of it, because money, of course, is part of the food chain here. But how to include that in care, I think, yeah, that's what we need to be on the lookout for. Are there other questions? There are none, right?
If there are, feel free to ask them. I can give you the floor. I think in that case, I want to thank you, both of you, for this conversation. I made a lot of notes, but I'm also happy that we're recording this, and we will make it available online afterwards. Thank you, Maria from Driessens Verstappen and Sjoerd van Tuinen, for this conversation. Really happy with it. Thank all of the other artists of contributing to the exhibition. Tomorrow I'll talk with Ana Maria Gomez Lopez. The next day will be with We Make Carpets, and afterwards all of the 4 conversations will be placed online. I also want to quickly thank Dora, who's also part of the attendees, curator intern, who did a lot of work around the exhibitions and the conversations. And I hope to see you tomorrow, and thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Nice evening, everybody. Doei, Maria.
Bye.